This is the BBC.
All right, there you are. Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from your friends right here. What's this called then? That jingle was called ID Dollar Amp. Obviously, 15 seconds of musical bliss. So it's another Confessions podcast coming up in just a few seconds. This week's Concise Collection, the stories are Video Blames, Catch Me If You Can, I Go to Tech Streams, and All Those Beers Ago. 4 top confessions on the way. Dear Father Simon and the Bastions of Benevolence, I think that's a new one. I am writing this confession on behalf of my parents in relation to one of our annual camping holidays in France. So another little summer one here. This is the late 80s, Father Simon. Now, there's something about camping and the temporary communities it creates, people living in close proximity to each other, and the general consideration of others that this promotes. It's wonderful. The sounds of camping are particularly nostalgic for me. The muffled clank of tent poles as people come and go. The lowered voices of nearby families over breakfast and dinner. My younger brother and I spend happy days running around campsites in flip-flops, splashing in the swimming pools and exploring the local area with our mum and dad, who, in addition to being devoted Francophiles, both spoke excellent French. On the year in question, we'd found ourselves camping next to a French family of 3, the parents and a boy who must have been about 10. This boy invoked a certain amount of jealousy in my brother and me, enjoying not only the shelter of a caravan, but also the possession of a Game Boy, which, if you don't remember, was the handheld computer game console, which went like that. Why are you reacting like that?
I love that sound.
I don't know what that is. Never had one.
Sound of a Game Boy.
Uh-huh.
Deprived childhood.
Yeah, I know.
We coveted this toy madly, having been told that we didn't need one as we had each other. A rationale we both agreed was nonsense. Sadly, our French didn't extend beyond basic descriptions of ourselves and our pets, so we couldn't even ask for a turn, and he didn't look as though he'd share anyway. On the night of the incident, my brother and I were in bed, and my parents were playing Scrabble in the main part of the tent. This is truly old-fashioned camping. Yeah. The soothing sounds of Scrabble tiles being shuffled and the clink of wine glasses drifting in through the cotton walls of the bedroom area. Then I suddenly became aware of a new noise. A distinctive bleep bleep coming from the direction of the French family next to us. It seemed the son had inexplicably opted to sleep in a little blue tent by himself, rather than in the far superior protection of his parents' caravan, and was apparently enjoying a late-night game of something electronic and French. My parents...
Of course.
How sinister. My parents had apparently detected the noise as well, as the Scrabble noises and low conversation had stopped. Bleep. Bleep. This was not good. The French boy was breaking the unspoken code of close proximity camping. Not only that, but he had apparently incurred the displeasure of my mum, who, to my horror, was now leaving our tent to go and speak to him. This she did, and although I couldn't understand the French she was speaking, her tone was abundantly clear. The boy, no doubt ashamed, gave no reply. Mum came back into the tent, re-zipping the door with some force. A few minutes passed, and the Scrabble, low conversation resumed, and then the bleep, bleep, bleep resumed. OC. I froze in my sleeping bag. This time it was Dad who went out to speak to the boy. Now, there is nothing as excruciatingly embarrassing as having your parents address one of your peers when they step out of line, something I almost always remember now as I'm a mum myself. My dad's French was several decibels higher and equally as firm as my mum's, and I lay there praying that he would now get the message and turn off the sound on his game. Dad returned and the tent door was once again zipped closed assertively. Moments passed, and then bleep, 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 bleep. Was he completely mad? Did the surly French boy actually have a death wish? There was no way he could have misunderstood my parents' meaning, and even if their French had been inadequate, their inflection was crystal clear. This time they both went out to deal with the late-night computer game addict. I lay rigid with fear, waiting for the inevitable torrent of angry French that was about to spew forth, this time in stereo. Instead, I heard the bleeping once again, but this time from a few meters behind our tent. Had the French boy gone rogue? Was he now running around the campsite, still playing on the Game Boy, just to taunt my already outraged parents? Were there no depths to which this French boy would sink? I had to admire his audacity. Oddly enough, though, instead of giving chase, my parents quite quickly came back to our tent. The Scrabble resumed, more wine was poured, and they didn't leave the tent again. Utterly baffled, I must have drifted off into an uneasy sleep at some point. It was only the next morning over baguette and pain au chocolat, just paints go, rich picture, that it was explained, doubtless delivered by a man on a bike with some onions, that It was explained to me what had happened. The noise, it turns out, had actually come from a toad. In fact, it was almost certainly this. Now, I'm adding this in, but we've mentioned this toad before because I came back from France with a recording of one a couple of years back. Wasn't sure what it was, and this is almost certainly what it was. It's the midwife toad, which sounds rather electronic.
It sounds like sonar.
Not as electronic as that, but, you know, in the middle of the night with lots of Scrabble tiles and wine being drunk. Anyway, so it wasn't a Game Boy, it was the midwife toad, who understandably would stop calling whenever one of my parents was outside shouting at the French boy, giving the impression that he was only stopping his game for long enough for them to return to our tent. My brother and I spent the rest of the following day studiously avoiding the surly French boy, which wasn't difficult, in fact, because he spent the day studiously avoiding my parents. Unfortunately, the story didn't quite end there, as the owners of the campsite were throwing one of their weekly camp get-togethers that evening. To my horror, we found ourselves sitting right next to the French family and the boy my parents had so terrorised the previous night. Bizarrely, though, the boy's parents and mine seemed to be getting along famously. They told us later that his mum and dad had, in some perverse French way, found it all very hilarious. However, my brother and I... the French. However, my brother and I spent the evening fielding death stares from the surly French boy, who it turns out had been told to leave the Game Boy back at the caravan for the evening for risk of further provocation. So, Father Simon, asked forgiveness on behalf of my parents from the French boy who, having no doubt been scared out of his wits by the mad English, received no sympathy whatsoever from his parents and apparently had his computer game privileges tightened. And I would especially like to ask forgiveness from the toad, whose mating ritual, as I now realise it was so disturbed by the nocturnal activities of my own misguided family. Well, mentioned the midwife toad, a quite extraordinary sound that it makes, but also it was confused for a Game Boy all those years back in the late 80s. Different times. Sister Bobby, what do you make of all that?
What a great story. I love the kind of, arms across borders and everything was all right in the end kind of story. And mum and dad double justice. That's really, really scary. The thing is, though, it's where you learn as a kid how to kind of negotiate. I think it's important to watch that. And I think everything's all right because the French parents actually also thought he was probably messing around with his Game Boy and actually liked the fact that the English mum and dad came and told him off so they didn't have to. So I think it's a win-win, except for the boy on the Game Boy, which, let's face it, you don't need it in the country, do you, really? There's lots of things to do.
Oh, hark at you. You don't need a Game Boy, you've got each other.
Look,
thanks
for nature.
The thing is, if you never put something down, you'll never find something new.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So Liz, one of the bastions of justice, forgives you completely.
Brother Matthew.
Well, why didn't Jean-Claude? Why didn't he say anything? Why didn't he at any boy? I'm not playing with a Game Boy. Why do you keep having a go at me? I'm not playing a Game Boy. There's no. I mean, they're speaking fluent French. He's French. Surely they can, between them, come up with it. I don't have a Game Boy that I'm playing with at the moment, which seems to be. Why are they taking it out on the tent as well? The tent zip seems to get a lot of fury from these self-righteous parents. That said, I feel that I should forgive because there is a code on campsites about not making a noise, even if you are a toad. So I am going to forgive.
BBC Radio 2.
Father Simon and the Diocese of Destiny. Nice. I like it when there's a new one there. Jules has come up with a new one. I wish to seek forgiveness for an unfortunate incident around 15 years ago that I fear may have ruined the futures of a full generation of school children.
Wow.
Now, we've had confessions before from exam invigilators, and this is another one. Back in the early 2000s, I was a teacher working in West Yorkshire. At this time of year, teachers everywhere look forward to exam season and the free time we get when our Year 11s go on study leave. In the past, however, we were often grudgingly called upon to invigilate some of the exams, and it is from one of these invigilation sessions my sorry tale begins. The job of an invigilator was to hand out exam papers, walk slowly around the school hall offering assistance to pupils who need it, and keeping good order by throwing the occasional dirty look and raised eyebrow to any kind of misbehaviour. Now, some of the GCSEs can be 2 hours long, and as you can imagine, the time passed extremely slowly. So to make the exams go quicker, me and a mate, we'll call him Dave, started to devise games that we could play. One game, we've had these games
Yes,
before.
I love these.
And one of the games, as I remember from the last one, was go and stand by the pupil you think is most likely to be the first to go to prison. It was
great.
It was that kind of thing. Okay. Now, so we were devising games. One game would be to take a protractor or compass and place it with a knowing wink and a nod on a pupil's desk, and then chuckle at the puzzled look on the pupil's face as they tried to work out which of the questions in their English GCSE required the use of a protractor. It's not funny, though.
No.
Another game we played was to give each other a series of moves or actions, such as a 3-star jump or a cartwheel, which you then had to perform at the back of the hall, behind the backs of all the pupils, without being seen by any of the other pupils or invigilators. If we were spotted, we would simply try and make it look as though we were bending down to pick up something or just stretching and yawning. The enjoyment of our exam games improved exponentially when one of us came up with the idea of playing Tiggy. This is a Pac-Man type game, and the rules were simple. 1, whoever was on had to try and tig the other person. 2, you could only walk and never run. 3, you could only move forwards or turn left or right, but never double back down the way you had come. Now, because of the slow walk nature of the game, we were invigilating after all, we simply appeared to be strolling leisurely around the hall, albeit in a slightly haphazard fashion, and we were able to surreptitiously play our game with no one suspecting what was actually happening. We began to keep scores, and the game went on for a good few exams without incident. It was during the final game of that year's exam season that things took a sinister turn. Our scores were level, so this game was the decider for the entire summer series. I was on, and we duly took our places at opposite ends of the school sports hall. You may turn your papers over now. Right. I began to hunt Dave down. Every move he made to avoid me, I matched and edged ever closer to him, intercepting him step by step. He would duck to the right, down one row, I would follow him. He would duck to the left, down another row, and once again I would mirror his moves. The desks were laid out in even rows and columns, and we were walking towards the front right-hand corner desk, occupied by a rather quiet, studious pupil called Keith, when it all went wrong. I was almost in touching distance from Dave when he reached the very front of the hall, with me just a desk or two's distance behind him. But instead of turning left when he reached the front, which would have given him multiple escape routes, Dave turned right across the front of Keith, who had his head down and was writing furiously to try and complete his exam paper before time was up. I mirrored Dave and turned right behind Keith's desk and left Dave with nowhere to go. It was the perfect checkmate. But instead of taking the tig like a man, Dave made the highly illegal move of both moving quickly and doubling back the way he had come against the rules, and made a U-turn across the front of Keith's desk. However, unbeknownst to Dave, he had inadvertently caught his foot in the strap of Keith's bag, which had been placed neatly under his desk. What happened next plays out in slow motion. Dave began to drag Keith's bag from under his table, but unfortunately the other end of the strap was wrapped around one of the legs of Keith's desk. Before Dave realised what was happening, he had whipped Keith's desk away, leaving a bewildered-looking Keith holding his pen mid-air as his desk and exam paper disappeared from under his nose. The force of the movement caused Keith's desk to ricochet into his neighbour's desk, sending it flying and making an almighty bang in which everyone in the exam hall looked up and gasped at what was happening at the front of the hall. Dave, unable to release his foot from the strap, stumbled into a table at the front containing a large blackboard, causing it to topple over and land on yet another unsuspecting pupil's desk. Dave ended up lying amongst a pile of upturned tables and spare exam papers, whilst pupils were laughing and standing up trying to get a better view. A few of the stricter members of staff were shouting, "Order! Order! No! Enough!" and angrily telling the people, "Sit down! Be silent, child." Meanwhile, I, being an honourable man, casually walked away from the absolute carnage at the front of the sports hall and pretended to discipline the unruly pupils further back. "Sit down." So I beg forgiveness not from Dave, as he had attempted to cheat in our game of Tig, but from the scores of pupils who had one of their vital GCSEs interrupted by my childish tomfoolery. I also beg forgiveness from studious Keith, who the last I saw of him was working on the wrapping paper counter of a local garden centre. A far cry from the high-flying career to which he aspired. I wonder whether I, says Jules here, was in some way responsible for our slightly juvenile game of Tig, or Tiggy as he calls it. Invigilators, you play these games. This happens to be a particularly extreme one. Keith is an innocent victim. What do you say? Well, Sister Bobby's looking cross.
I was really cross, actually, from the beginning when you talked about the protractor incident and messing with their brains. It's very serious, these situations, and scary.
So
it
what
doesn't
do I
take a
want this
lot.
for?
Yeah, you don't do that. That is not on. The other games I like, but you've missed a trick here. See, because, of course, you've got that really serious situation, 100 people doing something really serious, really important right at that moment in their lives, and you're being, playing silly idiots, which I approve of. But you have to do it stealth-like, and you have to do it properly. So really, why I can't forgive you, Jules, is because you broke the rules. It's fine to have the game. It is not fine to let everyone know about it, and so that's why you're not forgiven, because you failed to do that
And
properly.
in fact, you're right, the protractor one is the thing where the kid would obviously be the one who suffers. You think you might be completely taken out of your rhythm. I'm in the middle of a Chaucer essay. Don't give me a protractor, sir. Fool. Anyway, our brother Matthew.
Well, it strikes me that this is one of those times in life where you've got two polar opposites in the same. You've got one set of people who are going through a highly stressful experience and another set of people in the same room who are going through the most bored experience of their life, of invigilating. Oh, I've got to find my way through the next 2 hours. How very dull. But I love this story because it's got the sort of 70s sitcom farce about it of someone dragging all the tables off and then falling into a blackboard,
yes,
and then tumbling everything around. So I'm minded to forgive.
Dear Father Simon and the Emissaries of Exoneration.
Yes.
Very good. If you can come up with a brand new opening, by the way, you get extra points. And also Matt and Bobby feel way more likely to forgive you if you flatter them at the beginning. I'd like to take you back to the summer of 2012, a summer of commitment, a summer of glory, and of course of gold medals. After a holiday in Norway with my husband and 3 kids, we flew back to London just after the start of the Olympic Games. This feels like a very long time ago. A few days later, our 2 older children were booked onto a school trip that involved travelling from Yorkshire on a coach with their mates for an overnight stay, taking in various Olympic events. Most sensible parents would have organised to meet the teachers in London to deposit said kids, but not us. Being 16 and 14, they wanted the full 24-hour coach trip experience with their mates, so Mum was volunteered to drive them up from London the day before, leaving Dad and our youngest to soak up the Olympic atmosphere. As we were about to leave the house to drop them off at school, I reread the letter from school, as you always do, last minute and everything, with the instructions for the trip and essential items that the children were to take. This included each child needing a mobile phone on them to enable them to contact a teacher if they got lost in the sprawling mass of the Olympic Park. It was at this point that our middle child confessed to having broken his phone before the recent holiday. There was no option. He had to take my brick of a phone, my old phone, which he reluctantly agreed to do, despite losing any street cred that he might have. He decided he would have to keep it hidden in a pocket to avoid any embarrassment. You don't want to go to school with the wrong phone, particularly if it's absolutely enormous and old-fashioned. So the kids set off with the school, and I returned home to get ready for a train ride back to London to meet up with my husband and third child. Realising I now didn't have a phone, I scrabbled around in the cupboard that every house has, the one with all the bits and pieces, managed to find one of the children's old handsets, which also had the appropriate charger and even a small amount of credit, which was pretty extraordinary. As a reward for all the driving, I was treated to first-class travel on the East Coast Railway. After the last-minute scramble looking for phones, I climbed aboard, looking forward to a couple of hours to myself, peace and quiet. I sent a text to my husband, which went, luxury bliss. Who's this? Came the reply. I thought he wouldn't recognise the number. He knows nothing about the phone fiasco with our middle child, and it was at this point I thought I would send a few subtle suggestions to him.
Oh, no.
The sort of thing only a husband would know.
Of course, yeah. Great idea.
No. No. Oh, okay, we'll leave it like that. After a few texts going back and forth, he sent the text... I've changed this slightly. Well, let's see how flirty you can get then.
Oh, no.
Well, I didn't want to go too deep into that sort of a conversation. Not that kind of a woman.
No.
Especially in the decency of an East Coast Railway first-class carriage. One has standards.
Yeah.
Deciding I was losing my precious peace and quiet time, I didn't reply. Leave him dangling, I thought. On arrival at King's Cross, I was met by my husband and third child. I quizzed hubby about the texting and why he hadn't guessed who it was.
Oh, I wonder what he said.
What texting?
Oh, really?
He said. Ha ha, very funny. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I replied, giving him a rakish wink. He played it very cool, so I showed him the messages. Right, that's not me. Came the reply. What? I said, capital letters, larger font, exclamation marks, making the most of King's Cross turn and stare. How had this happened? My fingers scrabbling on the keys, I scrolled into the contacts. I had had the foresight earlier to know that I needed to use Dad in the contacts, as it was one of the kids' old phones, but now I realised this was a phone that had been bought by one of the kids from a reputable online auction site. And on closer inspection of the contacts, I scrolled past Dad to find underneath it another Dad.
Oh, no.
I have no idea who this other Dad was,
Oh, dear.
but the phone had obviously been sold without clearing the contacts list first. So, easy mistake to make, Father Simon and the collective. I therefore beg forgiveness for accidentally sending suggestive texts, albeit, I should say, of a very mild nature and quite out of character, to an unsuspecting Dad, whoever he was, and possibly even worse, cutting off the conversation as soon as it had got started, potentially leaving him down. Anyway, you can understand how that would happen. She thought she was just sending some messages to her husband, and it turned out it was someone else's husband. So, and all entirely innocent, I think, but let's see what Sister Bobby makes of all that kind of thing.
Well, embarrassed mother of three from the north. What a fabulous story. I was thinking, didn't Kate Bush teach you anything with Babushka? And there's a couple of others, just be careful. Yeah, you know the story?
No.
Oh, okay.
You
It's
know the
another
song.
story.
Oh, I know the
Babushka,
song.
Yeah.
I don't know the story.
Well, listen to the lyrics then.
Oh, right, okay.
Anyway, it's fabulous. What a great idea. The thing is, what I'm impressed with, embarrassed mother of three, is the fact that you started to have the idea of sending flirty text messages to your husband after three children, and that needs to be celebrated. So on that count, of course, you're absolutely forgiven.
Okay, what's your message here, Brother Matthew?
Yes, all for a bit of that. I think.
Bit of what?
The great advice there. Anyway, I think surely the fault here lies with the person who didn't clear the contacts. Who takes a new phone and doesn't clear the contacts from the address book? There is surely the greater crime here. So I am going to say forgiven to embarrassed mother of three from the north because it was your child's fault for not clearing the contacts.
BBC Radio 2.
Dear Father Simon and the Drive Time Clergy Collective, no points for originality there. I am writing to request forgiveness for an event that took place when I was young and foolish and living just outside Glasgow. It's June 1987 and we had just finished our exams. The mood was joyous, the sun was shining. We were all glad The pressure of the exams had finally come to an end. Basically, we all needed to blow off some steam. Let me first tell you, I was not the most popular boy at school. I wasn't the school sporty one. I wasn't the moody goth, as was popular at the time. Just an average guy who studied hard, was well behaved, and did what he was told. Now, at this time, I did have a fancy for a certain girl who sat next to me in history. Caroline was very popular, very good looking, and was chased by all the cool guys in the school, and I fancied her something rotten. Well, during our history class, not much teaching going on, as it was near the end of term. That's that wonderful feeling where you go to school, but all the work's done, so you're just dossing
Put
around.
on a DVD, something like that.
Something like that. There's always one teacher, though, who says, no, you're going to have to do some work. But anyway, there wasn't much going on in this particular history class. So she says, are you going to Sharky's Empty on Saturday? At this point, I should explain an empty is a West of Scotland term for when the parents are out and the house is going to be empty.
Home Alone.
Therefore, a party had to be had. Sharky, I can tell you, was the coolest, most popular guy in the school, and he had a huge house. Anyway, I told Caroline, no, I wouldn't be going to Sharky's because I hadn't been properly invited, which is when she turns to Sharky and says, can Si come to the empty on Saturday? He just shrugged and grunted. So Caroline turns to me and says, there you go, you're coming. I later told my friend Johnny, who was ecstatic, hey, we're going to an empty at Sharky's. Nice one. I was nervous because I knew I was going to feel a little out of place, but Caroline was going to be there, so basically I just had to suck it up. Well, the Saturday came and we turned up at Sharky's house to find the front door already open. We went in and the house was jumping. People dancing on tables, a kitchen full of people being ill,
Great.
Nice.
Fabulous
girls
already.
crying in the toilet, just a usual teenage party, really. But this was my first empty, and it was amazing. So we went to the kitchen and opened out our carry-out, consisting of 2 bottles of cider. Nice. They came prepared. I then spotted Caroline, and she came over and started being very friendly. Now, I know it was probably the lemonade talking, but she was being very touchy-feely, and I genuinely thought I was in here, right up to the point, until Sharky came over and snogged her right in front of me, and then led her away. Well, I knew it was never to be anyway. But while I was cursing my luck, a fight broke out in the kitchen about someone opening someone else's cans.
Oh dear.
And not wanting to get involved, this is the sentence that doesn't quite make a lot of sense, Johnny and I decided to go upstairs.
Right.
Really?
Get out of the way.
Okay.
Get out of the way. Hide.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Well, I know that. What's wrong
Yeah.
with the garden? Oh, I suppose there were people being ill in the garden.
Yeah.
Anyway, we opened a door looking for the loo
Oh no.
and found
Oh,
it was
no.
the airing cupboard. Anyway, looking up, we saw a loft hatch. And naturally, me and Johnny decided to go and have a look.
Obviously.
Well, Father Simon, the loft was absolutely massive. Partially floored with cases, boxes and games, we started to have a good look round. We were messing about and trying stuff on. Because
It's gone down a completely different route.
it has. Because
I think as in clothes. Yeah.
I found
I know what they meant.
I found a box of fur coats. What else? Anyway, hats, and even found a crazy bear costume, which I obviously put on.
Obviously.
So at one point, I found an accordion and started to try and play it. So there I was. So there I was, sitting in a loft with a bear costume and playing an accordion. We were so engrossed in all the paraphernalia in the loft, we hadn't noticed the music had stopped downstairs. Wondering why it had suddenly gone quiet, Johnny headed towards the skylight with a telescope that we'd found
What is in this loft?
and stuck it out the window. He came back with a look of panic and said, "It's the Rozzers.
No, he didn't.
It's the police. They're outside."
He's in the west of Scotland. He wouldn't have said that, would he?
Ross.
No.
I looked, and sure enough, the street was full of teenagers and a police van with the blue lights flashing. I then saw a car pull into the drive. Turns out our neighbour had called the police due to the noise and managed to get in touch with Sharky's mum and dad, who'd come back from the golf club dance. We suddenly realised the gravity of our situation and decided we better try and tidy the loft. I then heard a voice shout, "Is there someone in the loft?" before the hatch suddenly opened. I panicked and ran to the back of the loft while Johnny hid behind some boxes. However, in my panic, I forgot that the loft had only been partially floored.
Oh, no.
And the place I ran to was not floored. I felt my foot drop and I thought, I'm going through here. I went straight through the ceiling and landed on a bed, absolutely covered in plaster with bits of ceiling hitting me on the head. I stood up and turned round, and there was Mrs. Sharkey standing in the middle of the bedroom, about to get undressed. She looked more than a little shocked, it's fair to say, probably because a bear covered in plaster and playing an accordion had just crashed through the ceiling
Still got the accordion.
into her room. As Mrs. Sharkey started screaming, I turned and ran out of the room and down the stairs and then out the back door. I could hear Mr. Sharkey trying to climb down from the loft as fast as he could. I ran out of the house. I kept going over the hedge at the back of the garden, into another garden and beyond. The story of the bear that ran away from Sharky's empty became legendary around our way, although no one ever discovered the identity of the bear. I never actually told anyone, even though I knew it would have made me more popular.
Yeah.
Which is true. Father Simon, I seek forgiveness from Mrs. Sharkey for giving her the fright of her life and damaging her property. I also seek forgiveness from Johnny for running off and leaving him behind. I also seek forgiveness from Sharkey himself as he was grounded till the summer. However, he did steal Caroline from me. So, actually, which is the unforgivable thing there. So you can imagine that would be quite, you're just getting undressed, you're a little bit cross because you've been dragged back from the golf evening soiree, and then suddenly a bear playing accordion drops from the roof. That doesn't happen every day. Sister Bobby.
I think I'm beyond caring. That's such the best story ever. Simon, I would almost marry you for that.
Oh.
What was
she
the
means
point
the other
again?
Simon.
It's not you. Obviously.
Oh.
Right.
I get it now.
Simon, for the best story ever, and you shouldn't really go into people's lofts without their permission and everything, but it was the best story ever, and it's not my usual remit. You are forgiven just for the best story ever.
9.
I'm exhausted. How many layers of a confession can you have? And who can't resist? I mean, a loft hatch has just got to be investigated, hasn't it? Particularly when you've had 2 bottles of cider split with your mate Johnny.
How many lofts have a big chest full of clothes with an empty bear costume in there somewhere?
Fantastic.
Well, I've just cleared out a loft, and there is an accordion and a guitar and an amp and some. There you go.
Very
Actually, we've got a loft with Halloween stuff in it. 'Cause that comes out every year.
Maybe everyone's
there you
got
go.
one. All right.
Silly me. But also that was really fantastic. And what happened to Johnny? Who cares?
Yeah.
It abandoned his mate, fallen through the ceiling, given Mrs. Golf Club a bit of a surprise, and off he went. That's fantastic. Simon, absolutely forgiven.
Mr. and Mrs. Sharkey, I think, probably had this coming. I mean, you disappear off to the golf country club and leave your house empty with your son, young Junior Sharkey. This is always going to happen, apart from, obviously, an accordion playing bear falling through your ceiling. Probably didn't expect that. That's fair enough. So I am going to forgive.
Well, they were this week's confessions. Don't suppose you forgave anybody, like normal. If you have one of your own, and let's face it, you got hundreds, confessions@bbc.co.uk. That'd be nice. Thank you very much indeed. You've been promising to send one in for a while. And if you missed any of our shows in the last week, thanks. Anyway, you can download them all to your smartphone or tablet from the wonderful, genuinely wonderful BBC iPlayer radio app. On Monday, Lord Professor in that order, Robert Winston, was talking about My Amazing Body Machine. That's not me, that's everybody, because that's the name of the book. On Tuesday, we had a Tuesday with Papa Was a Rolling Stone and some Brighton rock, No Ordinary Love and High Hopes. Very nice. Wednesday, Ricky Ross and Lorraine McIntosh from Deacon Blue talked 30 years of Raintown. And for Foodie Thursday, Nigel cooked up a Persian Juji chicken wing kebabs with skewered tomato. And if you made it to the end of last week's podcast, you had to tweet, "Do you have the internet in Britain?" with an American intonation. Neris, David, Crease, Phil Seban, the Reverend Xavier, Alison Warminger, and Ian Berry, and many, many more who sent that in. So this week's top code phrase is, would you stand by the pupil you think is most likely to go to prison first? Thanks for listening. We finish with ID Supergrass, Short.
BBC Radio.